Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jeff Cook with United Methodist Insurance Program. This is another in our series of Church Protection Connection sponsored webinars. And our topic for today is active shooter and intruder response. Our guest speaker once again is Mr. Barry Young, Vice President of Operations for Strategos International. Barry has been Director of Security for 2 churches. He is the chaplain for the Independence, Missouri Police Department. His goal, and as you will see, his passion, is to see that every church in the United States has a comprehensive security plan and team that provides coverage from the parking lot to the pulpit. If you have any technical difficulties during today's program, we ask that you would use the chat feature to send a message to the host. And we will have some time at the end for Barry to take some of your questions. So you can use the chat feature to send your questions to the panelists as we go along. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll turn it over to Barry, who will tell you more about Strategos and church security. Lord, we ask your blessings on your people. We pray for wisdom, health, safety, and security. Help us to provide a safe and welcoming environment for all who seek to know you in communion with us. Amen. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Barry Young, VP of Operations for Strategos International. Barry, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Jeff. Thank you so much for letting me be here today. And I want to say thank you to every person that's joining us. I want to tell you it's an honor to be here today. As Jeff said, my name is Barry Young, and I've had the blessing to be with UMIP before, and it's an honor to have you here today. The number one goal we're going to share today is we want to keep people safe so they can hear the message that your church is sharing. And so at Strategos, we're the largest provider of church security training of any company or ministry in the world. We do over 300 live church trainings and about 100 virtual Zoom, WebEx video trainings all over America. In 2002, we started as some Christian police officers that wanted to provide law enforcement military training. Then we started doing executive protection. Then we started doing school and church training. And now we do online training. And so we're so honored to have you here today. Our goal is we want to talk about today active shooter intruder response. Now, when we talk about why is this such a need, unfortunately, numbers of attacks have gone up. Since 1999, we've had 235 active shooter events at public schools. And unfortunately, the church is even more dangerous than the public school. Since 1999, we've had over 1,700 violent church attacks. At Strategos, we have 50 instructors we have 8 police chiefs, federal, city, county, state, law enforcement that work for us. And those are my team right there. But can I tell you, not only are you looking at law enforcement and military veterans, but they all love the Lord and they all attend church every Sunday. We go to churches like this one. This was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we did a 200-person church training. We're now going to Bible colleges and seminaries. This is North Point Bible College in Haverhill, Massachusetts. We go to Christian schools all over America, and we go to police departments. And you might say, well, why do you go to police departments? Because even though right next to me is the sheriff of LaPlace County, even though police are trained in law enforcement tactics, they're not trained in church security. And so we now even go to Fortune 500 companies. I had the blessing to train 20,000 workers at Honda in active shooter intruder response, part of what you're getting today. And so at Strategos, we want to talk about active shooter intruder response for churches and schools. Our goal is this. We want to keep your church safe, though, so they can share the message of God's love and God's peace. Now, the biggest question I get asked, and I want to answer it now before we get the webinar totally going, is, Barry, should we have armed or unarmed church security? Barry, should we have armed or unarmed Christian school security? And this is what we tell 100% of our churches. Pray. And if God tells you to have unarmed security, we want you to have unarmed security. If God tells you to have armed security, we want you to have armed security. We just want you to seek God and do what he tells you to do. And so today, this is not a gun or a no gun question. The question is, are we trained and prepared, or are we not trained and prepared? You would not believe how safe we can make a church with unarmed training if people have the training. I cannot tell you how safe we make countless high schools with unarmed training. And so why is this so important? This is so important because of this picture here. The mission is very, very simple. Sometimes people like this little boy need people like you and me. Our churches are filled with innocent people that need to be protected. And so what we want to do at Strategos is why should we take this course? Many of you are very, very busy, and I just want to say it's an honor to be with you today. Why is this course important? Because an active shooter equals a homicide in process. Would anybody like to guess how many shooting deaths we have every year? Every year in the United States of America, we have over 15,000 shooting deaths. How about shooting injuries? Just because you get shot doesn't mean you die. Every year we have 30,000 shooting injuries. So that means every year there's 45,000 shooting injuries or deaths. Since 1999, we've had 235 school shootings. And since 1999, we've had over 1,700 church attacks. Just consider this. Last year alone, we had 261 violent church attacks. How many of you wish this was your retirement portfolio? I really do. I want you to look at 2004. We had 4 violent church attacks. And now up to 2017, 261. So what I want to do, if you're listening, I want to encourage you to turn your volume up. This is the live dispatch call from 1999 Columbine High School. Now, it's going to be very hard for you to hear because this person is hiding underneath a desk. And I want you to get just 30 seconds to a minute of a glimpse of what happens when there's a real active shooter at your church or your school or wherever you may be.
County 911. Yes, I'm a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun. He was shot out a window. I believe one student. I did Columbine High School. I don't know what's in my shoulder. If it was just a last week or what. Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am? Yes. Okay. Yes. And the school is in a panic. And I'm in the library. I've got students down under the tables, kids. Kids under the tables. Kids are screaming. Some of the teachers are trying to absorb it. We need police here. Okay, we're getting them there. Police here. Who is the student, ma'am? I do not know who the student is. Okay. I saw a student outside. I was in Holden earlier, but okay. I was on Holden. I saw a guy. I said, what's going on out there? He said, that was probably something up. I said, probably a second. I don't think that's a good idea. And I went walking outside. See what was going on. He turned the gun straight at us and shot. And my God, the window.
Regular full training, we would be able to play that in its entirety. But one thing I want you to get is I want to ask you the question, did you hear a piece in that phone call? Obviously not. Unfortunately, the librarian was telling the students what not to do. Unfortunately, the librarian hadn't been properly trained, and many of the students in that library sadly were killed. And so what I want to talk about briefly in this webinar is how can we keep your church and your Christian school safe? We want to give you today tips, tools, and techniques to keep you and the people you love safe. First of all, we've got to overcome normalcy bias. And normalcy bias means that oftentimes people in a safe environment cannot conceive that the environment could become unsafe. An assumption is made that since there's never been a crisis, there never will be a crisis. And so what we want to do is we want to keep people safe. Let me give you some samples of normalcy bias. Here we are at Wedgwood Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas in 1999. There was an active shooter that had come into the church, and there was a man talking to 2 females. And as he's talking, he saw the shooter, and he told the females that this was just a skit. The active shooter comes down the hall, shoots him in the chest, and all of a sudden blood begins to come up. He tells the females this is just a paintball gun. And then many teenagers start running at the active shooter saying, shoot me, shoot me. We want to be in the skit. Unfortunately, when stress and duress happen, we always hope for the best. But what our goal is at Strategos, we're not telling you to stop hoping for the best. We want you to hope for the best. but we have to prepare for the worst. Here we are at the San Bernardino massacre, December 2nd, 2015. Many people inside the building, when they heard fellow employees getting shot, they thought that was firecrackers. Sometimes when we go to churches, they'll say, well, we thought when there was an active shooter in our church, it was that firecrackers. Now, we often ask people, well, how often does your pastor light firecrackers in Sunday morning service? And the reason we ask that is because we got to overcome normalcy bias. What happened at Virginia Tech? An active shooter came in to the school at Virginia Tech and began to kill students, and everybody thought it was a construction noise. The Paris shooting, November 3rd, 13th, 89 people were killed inside the theater, and many of those inside the Paris theater thought it was pyrotechnics. Columbine High School, when an active shooter came in, the drama teacher went out to the hallway and yelled to the students, stop practicing for the play. So I want to hammer these statistics home one more time. We had 261 church attacks last year and over 1,700 violent church attacks since 1999. So we've got to understand that violent threats are taking place every year in our church. So when a violent threat begins, automatically you're going to have startle and fear. That is very normal. I've had some people say, well, Barry, because of my training, we won't have startle and fear. I'm going to tell you right now, regardless of your training, if there's an active shooter in your church, you'll have startle and fear. Now, here's where most churches go, is to an untrained reaction. Now, let me show you what that looks like. An untrained reaction means you have that normalcy bias, which is what we talked about. Oh, that must be firecrackers. That must be balloons popping. And then there's disbelief. Oh, my goodness. Somebody I've gone to Sunday school with is getting harmed. And then we have denial. And then we have panic. And then we have helplessness. Can we agree that nothing in that list is good? Can we agree that nothing in that list is helpful if there's an active shooter? So what our goal is at Strategos, when we do over 300 live trainings and over 100 video trainings, is we want every church in America to have a trained response. Now, it's like I said earlier, you don't need to have guns to keep people safe. If God tells you to have armed training or unarmed training, the key is we need people trained. And what does that look like? First of all, we accept the crisis. And then we're aware and proactive, not reactive. Most churches, most workplaces, more schools, they're more reactive. We want to be proactive. And then that means that we recall our training. We're going to give you some training today. We're going to give you some tangible tools and gifts to keep people safe during an active shooter event. We've got to have an urgent response and then a commit to act. And so what we want to do, the Bible says in Proverbs 22:3 that a wise man sees danger and prepares for it. We want to be that wise man that sees danger and prepares for it. Matthew 10:16 says, be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And Acts 20:28 says, set a watch over yourselves and the flock. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you one more video. And I want you to see in this video, this is an active shooter at Fort Lauderdale Airport. Now, what you're going to see is what it looks like when there's an active shooter and the innocent people around him have not been trained. When I show you this video, please make sure you turn your volume up. When I show you this video, the announcer says, watch as people are running in terror. I want you to notice that the announcer lied. Nobody's running in terror. You're going to see on the right side of the screen an elderly woman hide behind a wire mesh cart. You're going to see in this video what it looks like when there's an active shooter, but the people that are the victims have not been trained. Here we go.
The attack came without warning, as seen on this airport surveillance video obtained by TMZ. 26-year-old Esteban Santiago pulls out his pistol and opens fire. Passengers run for cover as Santiago moves out of camera range through the baggage claim section, where police say he emptied his 9mm semi-automatic handgun and then reloaded once, killing 5 people.
So I want you to see that the announcer says they run for cover, but most of them just stand still. They're frozen in their tracks. One lady hides behind a mesh cart. And so what we don't want is, we don't want you to be paralyzed in fear. We want you to be active in preparation. Let me say that one more time. We don't want you to be paralyzed in fear. We want you to be active in preparation. Can I give you one of my favorite examples? How many of you listening today all over America know how to drive a manual transmission? A manual transmission used to be really hard to learn. Remember when you first learned and you were on a hill and the car was bucking or you killed the car? But once you learn to drive a manual transmission, you could turn on the radio, drink a Coke, eat a Snickers bar. That's the same way with active shooter training. At the beginning, it's hard to learn. But once you've learned it, now it becomes a second nature. And so what can we learn from law enforcement shootings at schools and churches? Please get this. The attackers have learned as well. And one thing I want you to get is the majority of active shooter events, by the time law enforcement shows up, the attack is over. So active shooters are learning. And that's important that we as the church, we have to keep learning. And so does law enforcement. So when we talk about this today, most schools are reactive. Most churches are reactive. The very first active shooter event at a public school was 1764. The very first church attack, well, we see the Bible, constant violence in the Old and New Testament. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can keep people safe. Here at the Columbine shooting, there were 38 people shot. Now, I want you to notice an important stat. Just because you get shot doesn't mean you got to die. 38 people were shot. 15 died, unfortunately. I want you to notice the attackers took 1 year to plan for this active shooter event. Do you know the majority of active shooters, they take a year to prepare for the active shooter event? When we look at this, the active shooters came into the cafeteria, they planted explosives. They exchanged rounds with a school deputy. Law enforcement formed a perimeter and they waited for SWAT team to arrive. Law enforcement has since changed that response protocol. But what I want to communicate to you is if the active shooter has a high level of pre-planning and commitment, so should we. If you're listening here, I want you to get this. The worst church attack in America was November 5th, 2017 at First Baptist Church, Sutherland Springs, Texas. What happened there? There was an active shooter that came in. That active shooter fired 400 rounds in the sanctuary, shooting 46 and killing 26. And so what we've got to do is we've got to have a high level of pre-planning and commitment. This is a picture of the cafeteria at Columbine High School. The active shooters thought they would kill most of the people in the cafeteria, but that's not what happened. The active shooters planned wrong. The cafeteria had many exits and students fled. What room had the highest fatality rate in Columbine? It was the library, where people had no way to escape. Let's get a little more current now. Let's talk about Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Sandy Hook, Connecticut was in 2012. It's the worst shooting at an elementary school. 27 killed, 2 wounded. Between 8:30 and 9:30, an active shooter kills his mother and takes her weapon. And then what happens? 30 minutes later, the active shooter forces his way into the school. Now, this is very important because a lot of churches don't think they need active shooter training because they have great locks or they have great doors or they have cameras. The reason we need training, I want you to see this. This public school had very expensive locks, very expensive doors, but he breached the lock. Nothing replaces training. Nothing replaces training. And so what happens is this active shooter begins to move throughout the school. And what we say at Strategos is our goal with every church in America is we want to partner with you to keep people safe. We say this at Strategos, let's prepare and prevent so we don't have to repair and repent. You know, some people say, well, Barry, I don't know if I could talk to my church leadership about church safety or church security. This is one thing I say all over America. The only thing harder than talking to church leaders about church security is telling them why you didn't talk about church security after something happens. And so we want to make sure that we can prevent what happened at Sandy Hook. I'm going to show you in just a moment how the power of training makes a difference. Look at Caitlin Roag. At our Strategos trainings, we never mentioned the name of an active shooter. There was a first grade teacher named Caitlin Roag, and because of her training, she saved all 15 students' lives. She evacuated the students away from the threat, put them into a bathroom, and what she did is she made an improvised lock. She saved countless people's lives. I cannot share this with you enough. Nothing replaces training. You know, some people say, well, Barry, if we have one police officer at our church, what about that? At my church, we have an off-duty police officer, but we still have a volunteer team of church safety members because you can't put a police officer in every room in the church. And what happens is, I want you to see this, in a very short time, 27 people are killed and 2 are wounded. There's a phrase we use a lot at Strategos. All of my employees are police. I'm in law enforcement, but there's a phrase we use: when seconds count, the police are minutes away. And our goal for every American church is to partner with churches, according to Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. One thing we see is that we've got to make sure that we have recognition and response. So we can't just recognize a threat, we have to be able to respond to the threat. And I'm going to give you some simple tools that you can take back to your church today to keep you safe. But before I do that, I have one last video. Again, if you can turn your volume up, this is Caitlin Roag. This is the woman that saved all 15 students in her classroom. We say this at public schools and at churches. The teachers, the church leadership, the church safety team, they're the ones that make a difference. Even if your church hires an off-duty police officer, unless you've got an off-duty police officer in every room, you've got to make sure there's training. Watch what one person can do that's been properly trained. This is Caitlin Roag being interviewed by Diane Sawyer.
All day, we have met people who remind us what teachers do, how much they care, even in the face of terror. And I sat down with a first grade teacher at that school, Caitlin Roag. She heard gunfire, large windows exposed her classroom, so she managed to rush 15 small children into a tiny bathroom to try to save their lives.
I put one of my students on top of the toilet dispenser. I just knew we had to get in there. I was just telling them it's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. I had pulled a bookshelf before I closed the door in front of it. So it was we were completely barricaded in. I turned the lights on.
Did you tell them to be quiet? Did you worry about one of them?
No, I told them to be quiet. I told them we had to be absolutely quiet. Because I was just so afraid that if he did come in and then he would hear us and then he would maybe just start shooting the door. So I said, no, we just have to be absolutely quiet. And I said, there are bad guys out there now. We need to wait for the good guys. And I wanted us to be okay. And I'm so saddened that there are people who in this situation are not okay. And my heart goes out to anyone who knew them and was a part of their lives. I just can't imagine.
Did they cry?
No, if they started crying, I would take their face and say, it's gonna be okay. Show me your smile. I really tried to and one of my students would say things like, I know karate, so it's okay. I'll lead the way out.
They really said to you, we want to go home for Christmas.
Yeah. I just want to hug my mom, or just, things like that. They were just heartbreaking, and in my mind, because you're hearing, I've never been a part of something, obviously, anywhere near this traumatic. And so I'm hearing the gunfire in the hallway, and I'm thinking in my mind, I'm the first classroom. Why isn't he coming? I'm thinking we're next. And, and in my mind, I'm thinking, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, what are your thoughts? What are your, and I'm thinking that I have.
We don't show you that video to scare you. We show you that video to prepare you. Can I tell you, the police did not save her and those 15 students. She saved her and those 15 students. Well, our job at Strategos is we want you to partner with local law enforcement. But the reality is the average law enforcement response time is 4 to 9 minutes. So at Strategos, every August, we train uncountable thousands of public school teachers all over America. Every month, we train thousands of churches all over America. And this is why we do this, because the attacker is a different attacker than a robber. You know, a robber is a criminal that they want to rob money and leave. A child sex molester is somebody who want to molest the child and then leave. But I want you to see the active shooter is a completely different criminal. They desire to set the new record. They have a long list of personal failures. Oftentimes, they just blame innocent people. They're not highly trained, but they're heavily armed. The average active shooter brings in hundreds of rounds into the event. Generally, they don't take hostages. And this is a big one. This is a very big one. They're preoccupied with setting the record. They have no escapes plan. Oftentimes, you'll see the active shooter has been a victim throughout their life, and they think that by becoming the victimizer, that they're going to be a success. But in reality, we know that an active shooter is the ultimate failure in life. And so what we want to do right now is we want to talk about some lockdown principles. We want to talk about some lockdown because I want you to consider this. 100% of schools, if they receive federal funding, do lockdown training. We do lockdown training in multiple states with multiple school districts, and they'll bring us in to train their entire staff. So 100% of schools that have federal funding do lockdown training, but how many churches do lockdown training for their nursery and kids ministry? And even for adult workers, less than 1%. So you have 100% of federally funded schools doing lockdown training and less than 1% of churches. Let me tell you why this is important. Look at what lockdown training does to save lives in your church. I'm just telling you, every church in America, you can make your church safe. Look what lockdown training does. If you're trained correctly, it prevents the attacker from obtaining access to your interior of your building. What are the functions of lockdown? This is why we do lockdown, to remove students, teachers, church parishioners from the threat, to isolate the dangerous threat, and to allow for an accurate accounting of the children and the adults in all of our rooms. And then, depending on a situation, to organize an evacuation away from the dangerous area. Now, I want to let you know that we teach two types of lockdowns at Strategos: outside threat lockdown and inside threat lockdown. If you only do one type of lockdown, unfortunately, you're going to get multiple people killed. You have to have a plan for when the threat is outside, and you have to have a plan for when the threat's inside. And let me explain. When the threat is outside, what's the role of ushers and greeters? Lock the door so the threat can't get in. When the threat gets inside, what's the role of ushers and greeters? To evacuate all the people. Do you see why we need two lockdowns? Let me say that one more time. If you only have one lockdown, you'll get people killed. You have to have an outside threat lockdown. That tells us the threat is outside and we're in lockdown. And so the role of ushers and greeters is to lock, layer, reinforce doors so the threat can't get in. If the threat gets inside, you call an inside threat lockdown. And now the role of ushers and greeters is to evacuate all people. Let me take it one step further. Many of you churches have children's play areas. On an outside threat lockdown, if kids are at that play area, you want to get the kids inside. But on an inside threat lockdown, if kids are at your outdoor play area, we want them to stay outside away from the threat. And that's two of many reasons that we have to have two types of lockdown. Now, when we talk about lockdown, this is our 3-out response model. Now, what I'm about to share with you is the foundation for keeping every church in America safe. Every Christian school. First of all, every church, every school has to have a lockout strategy to stop the active shooter. We have countless situations where a church or school had lockout training. In 2017 in Northern California, a church had lockout training. The threat could not get in. Then we have get out. That means there is no way to lock out. Now you got to get out. And let me put a pause right here. Your church, if you're taking notes, your church only has two types of rooms: lockout rooms or get out rooms. Let me explain what that is. A get out room means there's so many exits you can't lock out quickly. What are some examples of get out rooms? Your sanctuary, your fellowship hall, a gymnasium. Most of the time, you're going to try to get out. What are lockout rooms? That means that just like Caitlin Roag, you've got the opportunity to lock people in a secure space. A lockout room would be an example, would be church offices, Sunday school rooms, nurseries, potential bathrooms. Now there's exceptions, but what we want you to get is we need every church in America trained with a real in writing trained lockout plan and a get out plan, and in a worst case scenario, a takeout plan. Now I want to say this right now. Takeout is an option we only use if we can't lock out or get out. If the shooter's in your area and you can't run, you got to be ready to fight. Simply taking a position underneath a desk is a fetal position. This will do nothing to prevent harm. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here you are, you're at your church, the active shooter begins. Or you're at your school or your workplace, the active shooter begins. What do you do if this happens? Well, we want every church in America to have a lockout plan and then be prepared with a get out plan and a worst case scenario, a takeout plan. That's what we want. Now, this is how we decide between lockout, get out, takeout. It's called threat plus location equals proper response. Now let me put a pause here. If we were doing a live training, it would be very easy for me to demonstrate this. In all of our live trainings, we actually demonstrate what we're talking about. And I want to let you know, all of our live trainings are typically 1 day to 2 days. So I know this is a lot of material. It's a lot of material in 45 minutes. But how we know lockout, get out, take out, it's a very simple equation. Threat plus location equals proper response. So if I'm in a classroom and the threat's in the hallway, threat plus location equals proper response. My goal is to lock out the threat. If I'm in a large room at the church and I'm several feet away from the threat, well, I'm going to default, if there's exits, to get out. And then lastly, takeout means you cannot get out and you cannot lock out. So when we make this decision, lockout means you're in an area that can't be locked out quickly. Get out means you're in an area that cannot be secured quickly. And then lastly, takeout is where lockout has failed and get out is unlikely. So why do we have to fight back? Now remember, we're always teaching, if you can lock out, let's go to lockout. And if you can't lock out, let's get out. We only teach takeout if there is no other option. But once in a while, and sometimes that is the only option. So I want to ask you today, do good guys finish last? We had 261 church attacks last year. Do good guys finish last? No, it's the unprepared good guys that finish last. Do you know how you're doing church security correctly? You know you're doing church security correctly when your church becomes more friendly. And you know you're doing church security incorrectly when your church becomes less friendly. Our goal is to make your church the most loving, Christ-filled place in your neighborhood. Our goal is simply to keep people safe. Fighting back. We teach this at public schools, at churches, all over America. If you're going to get beat doing something. Don't get beat doing nothing. Now, you might ask me, well, Barry, how should I fight? This is how I want you to fight. Now remember, I always want you, if you can, to lock out. If you can't lock out, we want you to go to takeout. But if you have to go, if you're lock out, go to get out. And if you can't lock out or get out, you have to be prepared for takeout. So you might say, Barry, how should I fight? If you're going to fight, I want you to fight like you're the third monkey going on a Noah's Ark and it's starting to rain. That's what you got to do. We got to keep people safe. So when we look out, what are the 3 outs? Oftentimes we hear people say run, hide, fight. At Strategos, we don't teach run, hide, fight. We teach lockout, get out, take out. And let me tell you why. If you just tell students to run where? It was February 14th, 2018, Marjorie Stone Douglas High School in Florida. Students were just taught run, hide, fight. And so what happened is they heard shots fired and they started running. And many of those students ran right to the shooter and unfortunately they were killed. So we teach, remember what I said earlier, threat plus location equals proper response. If you don't know where the threat is, don't start running because you may run right to the threat. If you don't know where the threat is, go to lockout in a secure room and make that room as secure as possible. Active shooters hate it when they have to break down a door because you're taking their time. Let's talk about hiding. At Strategos, we don't teach hiding. We teach lockout, get out, take out. What happened at Columbine is the librarian told all the students, get underneath the table, get underneath the table. Do you know what happens when you command your students to get underneath the table? Unfortunately, you make the job easier for the active shooter. If you're taking notes, I'm almost done, but there's 3 purposes for tables and chairs. If you're taking notes, let me give you the 3 purposes for tables and chairs. Number 1, don't hide underneath tables and chairs. That portion of training got students killed at Columbine High School. Here's what we want you to do. Don't hide underneath the tables and chairs. Let me give you the 3 roles for tables and chairs. Number 1, use the tables and chairs to improvise a lock so that the threat can't get in. If I was at your church, I could show you how I could use tables and chairs and make it almost impossible for the active shooter to get in. That's a whole lot better than hiding. We can teach you how to use tables and chairs and to improvise a lock where the active shooter can't breach the door. Number 2, what's the second purpose of tables and chairs? Do you know what we've seen save people's lives? It was December 19th, 2018, the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California. This Borderline Bar and Grill, they hired an off-duty police officer for security. The active shooter came in, executed the police officer, and he started to kill bar patrons. Thank God, one bar patron took a chair and broke a window, and it saved 30 people's lives, in my opinion. What's the second purpose of tables and chairs? Break a window and escape. So number 1, use tables and chairs to improvise a lock. Number 2, use tables and chairs to break a window to escape. Number 3, if there's a worst case scenario, what you want to do is use a table and chair to fight back. Simply telling people to run away is not going to be successful. What happens is in 2009, Strategos, we tested running, hiding, and fighting. And what we found out is about half of the teachers ran towards the gunfire when they started running. We said it earlier, it's threat plus location is what equals proper response. And so at Strategos, we want to partner with you in any way that we can to help you. You can find out more information at www.strategosintl.com. What do we want to do at your church? We want prevention. That's our, a lot of church security ministries teach response. We do response training. We have 20 classes on church security, but I'll tell you what we love to teach is prevention. Let's prevent, and then if we can't prevent, let's respond, and then let's minister to the people post-incident. That's what we specialize at Strategos, is prevention. And we do our training in workplaces, churches, schools. We have online options. My favorite is live training, but we have online videos for churches. It starts at $17. And so we just want to make sure that we're able to keep people safe. There's a lot of people that have testified about Strategos from all over the United States. But what we want to do is let you know that God loves you. God has a plan for your life. And we believe that the hope for the nation is found in God's church, sharing God's love with God's message. I just want to say thank you to UMIP. Thank you to Jeff. It has been an honor to be with you today. God bless you.
Barry, thank you. I have a few questions for you. Why do churches struggle to address this topic?
I believe that churches struggle to address this topic because it's an uncomfortable topic. It's something we don't like thinking about. My dad's an attorney, and my dad told me that the service that people hate doing the most is a will. People hate coming to his office and doing a will. We don't like to think about death. And so one thing we teach at Strategos is this sounds unique, but the more we think about keeping people from dying, the more we're going to keep people living. And so our goal at Strategos is we don't want a church to have bouncers. We're not wanting to make your church a fortress. We're wanting to make your church a hospital where everybody in that neighborhood feels welcome and encouraged to be a part.
And one other question we have, how do churches work with you to share this information within their congregation and within the surrounding community?
So what we do at Strategos is we partner with churches, and if a church wants us to come to their church, we'll come for free. We will go to any church in America for free. All they have to do is open up their doors, and we'll give them free spots just for opening up the doors. What we do at Strategos is we have a full-time social media specialist to invite people to the training, and the people in the community, they pay to attend. And then what we do at Strategos is for any church that opens up the doors, we give them free resources. And so one thing we understand is, as a ministry, we're stronger together. Now, the beauty of when churches come together is now churches can share information. A lot of times pastors will tell us that they'll have people that will aggressively come by the church asking for money or supplies. Once they come to the training, they meet the other churches around them that maybe aren't even in the same denomination. But now they've got a friendship, and the more everybody's working to a focused goal, the safer everybody becomes.
Great. And Barry, you had mentioned that you can use tables and chairs to create locks for doors. Is it possible to explain that without visual aids?
It's almost impossible to explain it without visual aid, but I'll give it a shot, Jeff. So
Okay.
For the person that asked that question, I get asked that question in every live training, and I'm not saying this to exaggerate. People's jaws drop when I show them how to improvise locks. And when I go to a church, this last weekend I was at First Baptist Church in West Plains, Missouri. We put a 200-pound man on the other side of the door and said, "Come in." This 200-pound man could not get through the door. So let me give you the two techniques real quickly. Two of the techniques, we teach at our live trainings 16 ways to lock a door. Let me cover two because of the brevity of this time. There are two B's. If you're taking notes, it's bridging or barricading. And let me explain what bridging is. Bridging is a door that swings in where we put tables and chairs all the way from that door to the wall. What that does is that removes the space. And so what you've done is you put in a hard wooden or hard plastic object all the way from that door, all the way to the wall. Every church training I demonstrate this technique at, I say you could take the lock off the door, that door is not coming open. The second technique of 16 we teach is called barricading. And that means that if you can't bridge the door, you're going to barricade the door. Now, here's a mistake people make. When they barricade out. Don't barricade out. We have to remove the line of sight for the active shooter. So we want to barricade up. You want to go from floor to ceiling. Now, those are two ways, but you nailed it, Jeff. It's very difficult to answer that without being able to demonstrate for the students.
Yeah, I understand that. What percentage of church attacks happen within the United Methodist community?
Okay, excellent question. I don't have the total answer, but I have part of the answer. Of all denominations in America, the United Methodist denomination is number 4 in church attacks. Number 1 is Southern Baptist. Number 2 is non-denominational. Number 3 is Catholic. Number 4 is United Methodist. So of the 261 church attacks that happened last year, of the 1,700 church attacks since 1999, the Methodist movement was number 4.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And a little clarity on sheltering in place. Is barricading or blocking, is that one of the important things that you teach to people who have to lock out? I mean, that's the purpose of that, right?
Yes. So sheltering in place. So glad you brought that up. So bridging and barricading is part of that. And like I said earlier, it's impossible to put everything in this 45 minutes because this is normally a 1 or 2 day training. We also show them each church room has a safe wall. So every room has 4 corners, but there is one corner that is the safest of all the corners. And so we show, when we do a live training, we show the church, this is how you pick the safe wall. So not only do we want you to bridge or barricade the door, but we show every church, this is where you want to put all your people. And in law enforcement SWAT team tactics, we call it the fatal funnel. We've got to get people out of the fatal funnel. And again, it's difficult to explain this without a demonstration. So I promise I'm trying to answer the question, but it's hard. A couple more things real quick. In sheltering in place, since you asked, one of the things we encourage all churches, we know if you have a kids ministry room or any rooms with adults, we like a window in the door for two purposes. Number one, to make sure people don't get injured when the door opens. But number two, according to Richard Hammer, the legal representative for the Assemblies of God, 22 of the last 23 years, the number one lawsuit brought against American churches is mishandling kids. So 99% of the time, we need to have that window clear. However, the only time we cover the door window is during an active shooter event. We've got to cover that to remove line of sight. There was 2 rooms at Sandy Hook, Connecticut that had no fatalities. Number one was Caitlin Roags when she evacuated the students. You know the second room, Jeff, where all 15 students lived? The teacher covered the window. And here's what the active shooter had a question. If he spends time breaking down the door, he didn't know what was on the other side. So you know what he did, Jeff? He opted, I'm not going to break down the door. I'll move on. So questions. These are great questions.
Yeah, we have a few more, and we still have a few minutes before the top of the hour. So I'm going to keep going with the questions because we're seeing some really good ones. What if your door opens out?
Okay. That's why at our live trainings, we teach 16 ways to lock a door. So what you would do if your door opens out, you cannot bridge, you got to go to barricade. And then let me tell you one of my favorite techniques, Jeff. At every church training, all it takes is 30 cents to lock a door that locks out. It's called the belay technique. We teach every church in America, we want in every kid's room a 12-foot piece of quarter-inch nylon rope. And in our live trainings, because we understand churches have limited budgets. If you Google right now, locks for a door to stop an active shooter, I promise you, you'll see locks from $50 to $500. A lot of churches don't have $500 or even $50 per door for a lock. So we teach churches in an active shooter event how to lock a door for 30 cents. A 12-foot piece of quarter-inch nylon rope. It's called the belay technique. And what I did this weekend when I was at First Baptist Church is I put the belay technique on the door, and a 200-pound man couldn't open up the door. It's a powerful technique. So for those that can't see right now, you would barricade the door, but we teach multiple other ways to lock doors that swing out. And then one other thing, we also teach people how to lock the doors with the human body. Now people say, would you really do that? Well, my question is, what's the alternative? If there's an active shooter and there's no lock on the door. And so we teach 4 ways to lock doors with the human body. What I did this last weekend is I took 2 females and I taught them a technique on the door, and I tried to break the door down. Then there was a state highway patrolman. I said, you try to break the door down. Neither one of us could get the door open. So there's a lot of hands-on techniques, because one of the things we specialize at Strategos is we want to teach churches how to keep people safe without spending very much money.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all of those tactics too buy time, right?
And so here's what I tell people. We don't have to keep the active shooter out for 2 hours. The average law enforcement response time is 4 to 9 minutes. And what makes a church safe is if all of the kids workers have been trained, now the active shooter is in the hallway all by themselves in a vulnerable position.
Yep. And the instructions that training you do at church, is that's more geared towards getting the church to establish the protocols, or is that something that the congregation participates in as well? Does it vary?
My answer is yes. And so we always tell people, 2 people trained at your congregation is better than no people trained at your congregation. Ideally, there's 3 layers of church security for every congregation. First of all is the parking lot. We like to have people in the parking lot just waving at people, greeting people. One thing we know, and I ask this to every church member, do criminals want to be seen or unseen? Pardon me. Yeah, do criminals want to be seen or unseen? The answer is always unseen. And so the moment you put somebody in the parking lot, risk starts getting reduced. Now, I didn't say risk was eliminated, but risk gets reduced. Number two, ushers and greeters. The moment every unlocked door has an usher and greeter, do criminals want to be seen or unseen? They want to be unseen. Again, we start to reduce risk. And the third layer of church security is parking team, ushers, greeters, and church security team. And we want that parking team trained in lockout. We want ushers and greeters trained in lockout and get out. And then we want the church security team trained in lockout, get out, take out.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if we have, I think we've covered the questions that we have today. The one question that I did get is whether there will be a recording of this made available, and we will archive this. And so I'm not seeing any questions we haven't addressed here. So we can get to the point where we can turn at least a few minutes back to everyone's day. Barry, this has been incredible. Again, tremendously important information. And we are going to continue to work with Strategos to make this information available. We are going to work to help promote their services to our churches and to further provide articles in the Church Protection Connection and access to information through them. If you want to continue to receive updates on information vital to protecting your church's people, property, and finances, be sure to sign up for the Church Protection Connection at www.uminsure.org. If you're looking for insurance for your church, you can also request a quote through our United Methodist Insurance Program, powered by Surety Faith. You can also purchase travel insurance for groups and individuals and find out about our background screening service through PeopleFacts. Barry, I want to thank you again. As always, it's a pleasure hearing you and the passion in your voice for church security, and thank you for what you do to protect the people in our churches and schools. And this is the second of our series in webinars. Watch the newsletter for further announcements and look on the website for archives. If you missed it earlier, Barry did a wonderful program for us on church security. And I would encourage you to look for that on our website and watch that. Thank you for being with us today. God bless you, and we appreciate the work that you're doing for the church and the community.
God bless you.
God bless you, Barry. Thank you.